Section 9 of Ancient Civilizations of Mexico and Central America by Herbert J. Spinden. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Mario Pineda. Chapter 4. The Aztecs, Part 1. The Aztecs were the dominant nation on the highlands of Mexico when Cortés marched with his small army to conquer New Spain. The horrible sacrifices that they made to their gods and the wealth and barbaric splendor of their rulers have often been described. But their history in point of time covered short space, and their art and religion was based in a large measure on achievements of the nations that had preceded them. Mayas and Aztecs compared to Greeks and Romans. A remarkably close analogy may be drawn between the Mayas and Aztecs in the New World and the Greeks and Romans in the Old, as regards character, achievements, and relations one to the other. The Mayas, like the Greeks, were an artistic and intellectual people who developed sculpture, painting, architecture, astronomy, and other arts and sciences to a high plane. Politically, both were divided into communities or states that bickered and quarreled. There were temporary leagues between certain cities, but real unity only against a common enemy. Culturally, both were one people in spite of dialectic differences, for the warring factions were bound together by a common religion and a common thought. To be sure, the religion of the Mayas was much more barbaric than that of the Greeks, but in each case the subject matter was idealized and beautified in art. The Aztecs, like the Romans, were a brusque and warlike people who built upon the ruins of an earlier civilization that fell before the force of their arms and who made their most notable contributions to organization and government. The Toltecs stand just before the foreline of Aztecan history and may fitly be compared to the Etruscans. They were the possessors of a culture derived in part from their brilliant contemporaries that was magnified to true greatness by their ruder successors. The Chichimecas. The term Chichimecas was applied by the more civilized tribes of the Mexican highlands to those nomads outside the Pale who dressed in skins and hunted with the bow and arrow. Some of these wandering groups spoke Nahuatl dialects, but the term was also applied to the Otomis who spoke a distinct language. Possibly through having been reduced in war, certain of these wandering groups were drawn into civilization, and when the Toltecan cities began to decline, they advanced to considerable power and prestige. In fact, the Aztecs may be considered as originally Chichimecan, along with the people of Texcoco. In later times, these city-broken nomads looked back with considerable pride on their lowly origin. The early life in the open is pictured interestingly in several documents, including the map of Tlotzin and the map of Quinatzin. We have already seen how the splendid culture of the Toltecan cities broke down under the weight of civil war about 1220 A.D. To be sure, Cholula appears to have kept alive the flame of Toltecan religion and art up to the advent of the Spaniards. Azcapotzalco, Colhuacan, and other towns near the lakes that had been established during the Toltecan period were able to hold their own for a time against the newer order. Xolotl, founder of the dynasty of Texcoco, makes his first appearance in the Valley of Mexico in 1225, 5 years after the dispersion of the Toltecs, according to the Codex Xolotl. He viewed the abandoned cities, but neither he nor his immediate successors chose to lead a sedentary life. The first date appears too early because it seems unlikely that the reigns of Xolotl and his son actually covered 90 years. The foundation of Texcoco took place in the reign of Techotlala, and Itztlisochitl, his son, fell a victim to the murderous policy of Tezozomoc, the famous tyrant of Azcapotzalco. Nezahualcóyotl, who regained the throne in 1431, was a great poet, philosopher, and lawmaker. The rulers of Texcoco were as follows. The dynasty of Texcoco. Nomadic chieftains. Xolotl, 1225-1284. Nopali, 1284-1315. Tlotzin, 1315-1324. Quinatzin, 1324–1357. Sedentary chieftains: Techotlala, 1357–1409, Ixtlisochitl, 1409–1418, Interregnum, 1418–1431, Nezahualcóyotl, 1431–1472, Nezahualpili, 1472–1515, Cacama, 1515–1520. Aztecan history. The history of the Aztecs has a mythological preamble in common with other nations of Mexico. The Chicomostoc or Seven Caves must not be considered historical but simply man's place of emergence from the underworld. The general conception of an existence within the earth that preceded the existence upon the earth is found very widely among North American Indians. It is likewise impossible to locate the island of Aztlan that served, according to several codices, as the starting place of the Mexican migration. The northern origin for the Aztecan tribe, to which so much attention has been paid, need not have been far from the Valley of Mexico, since in their entire recorded peregrination they hardly traveled 80 miles. Owing to the ineffectiveness of the Mexican time count, Aztecan chronology is far from fixed. The year was unknown by the day with which it began, and as this day ran the permutation of 4 names and 13 numbers, a cycle was 52 years in length. No method of keeping the cycles in their proper order seems to have been devised, except the laborious one of putting down every year in sequence whether or not an event occurred in it. According to different authorities, the year One-Stun, which begins the historical account in the Ovian Codex, was 648, 1064, or 1168 in the European calendar, each date differing from the others by multiples of 52 years. The last base, 1168, is correct, this being the epoch of the Toltec era established by Quetzalcoatl. The wandering tribes, among which may be mentioned the Chalca, Xochimilca, Tlahuica, Huexotzinca, Tepaneca, and Azteca, pushed their way into the region of the lakes and were allowed to live in less desirable locations as vassals to the established tribes. The peregrinations relate the succession of stops and the length of each stop. The Aztecs themselves made 20 or more stops lasting from 2 to 20 years. Finally, about 1325, they reached Chapultepec and for a number of years lived in comparative peace and quiet. Their bad manners and growing power excited the enmity of several nearby towns, and in 1351 the Aztecs, under their chieftain Huitzilopochtli, were worsted in a fierce battle. Remnants of the tribe, including Huitzilopochtli and his daughter, sought the protection of Coscostli, king of Culhuacan. They soon were able to repay his support in a war with Xochimilco. The first actual settlement on the site of the future Tenochtitlan was made in 1364, and in 1376 Apamapictli, a noble allied to the royal house of Culhuacan, was elected to be the first war chief of the new city. One of the first improvements undertaken by the new city was in the matter of water supply. Rights were secured to the famous spring of Chapultepec, an important gain because the brackish waters of the lake were not fit to drink. A double water main of terracotta was laid from the springs to the town. New land was made, probably after the manner still to be seen in the famous floating gardens of Xochimilco, by throwing the soil from the bed of the shallow lake into enclosed areas of waterwork. Gradually, a Venice-like city, traversed by canals and admirably protected from attack, rose from the lake. At the coming of the Spaniards there were 3 causeways leading to the shores of the lake, and each of these was protected by drawbridges. There was a city wall upon which were lighthouses for the guidance of homecoming fishermen. There were palaces and marketplaces, and a great central plaza called the Tecpan, where were situated the principal temples. The Spaniards destroyed the ancient city, blocking up the canals with the debris of temples, and building the new city of Mexico over the leveled ruins. Ancient relics are brought to light wherever excavations are made. In 1900, many sculptures and ceremonial objects were uncovered in Escalerillas Street near the cathedral. Recently, a building near the National Museum was torn down for replacement, and in digging for new foundations, part of the base of the Great Pyramid was found. This had been enlarged several times, as could be seen by the stairways successively buried under new walls. At the bottom of the balustrade of one stairway, a great serpent head of stone was found in its original position. Plate 40. The Aztecs count their history as a great people from their first war chief, Acamapichtli, who commenced his rule in 1376, Codex Oben. The names and the order of the succeeding war chiefs are the same in several records, but the dates are found to vary slightly. Acamapichtli, 1376-1396. Huitzilihuitl, 1396-1417. Chimalpopoca, 1417-1427. Itzcoatl, 1427-1440. Moctezuma I, 1440-1469. Axayacatl, 1469-1482. Tizoc, 1482-1486. Ahuitzotl, 1486-1502. Moctezuma II, 1502-1520. Cuitlahua, 1520. Cuauhtemoc, 1520-1521. After throwing off the yoke of their early overlords, the Tepanecas, by the subjection of Azcapotzalco at the beginning of the brilliant reign of Itzcoatl, the Aztecs of Tenochtitlan entered into a three-corner league with Texcoco and Tlacopan, Tacuba. This was an offensive and defensive alliance with an equal division of the spoils of war. Soon the united power of these three cities dominated the Valley of Mexico and began to be felt across the mountains on every side. Tenochtitlan gradually assumed the commanding position in the league, and although Texcoco continued to be an important center, the third member was apparently much reduced. The great votive stone of Tizoc records some of the earlier conquests of the Aztecs. At the arrival of Cortés, only a few important cities such as Tlaxcala retained their independence. But the crest of power had then been passed, and it seems pretty certain that the remarkable city in the lake would in time have suffered the fate of other self-constituted capitals both in the Old World and the New. Social organization. Spanish historians often liken Tenochtitlan to the seat of an empire and speak of the ruler as one who had the power of an absolute monarch, while other and more recent writers have declared that the tribal organization of the Aztecs was essentially democratic. The truth doubtless lies between these extremes. The people were warlike by nature, and all men, except a few of the priesthood, were soldiers. Honors depended largely upon success in war, and warriors were arranged in ranks according to their deeds. The common warriors formed one rank, and next came those who had distinguished themselves by definite achievements, which gave the right to wear certain articles of dress or to bear certain titles. The chiefs were elected for an indefinite term of office from the most distinguished fighters and could be removed for cause. But while the offices of state were elective, there was nevertheless a tendency to choose from certain powerful families and at least the foundation of an aristocratic policy. A chief was succeeded by his son or brother except when these candidates were manifestly unfit. In the actual succession of the great war chiefs of Tenochtitlan, a peculiar system seems to have been followed, in that the candidates from the older generation were ordinarily exhausted before the next lower generation became eligible. Thus Huitzilihuitl, Chimalpopoca, and Itzcoatl were all sons of Acamapichtli, and the last and greatest was born of a slave mother. Then followed Moctezuma Ilhuicamina I, the son of Huitzilihuitl. This chief had no male heirs, but the children of his daughter ruled in order: Axayacatl, Tizoc, and Ahuizotl. Moctezuma II was the son of the first of these, as was Cuitlahua, while Cuauhtemoc, the last Aztec ruler, was the son of Ahuitzotl. This peculiar succession was not in vogue in Texcoco, where son succeeded father and the lawful wife was chosen from the royalty of Tenochtitlan. In the various annals, the genealogies are often indicated, and the evidence that aristocracies existed is too strong to be overthrown. There are even cases of queens who succeeded to the chief power after the death of the royal husband. It is extremely doubtful whether the Aztecs ever had what might be called clans. We have seen that there were originally 8 closely related tribes constituting the Mexica or Mexici nation. The Aztecs themselves are said to have been divided into 7 groups that were first reduced to 4 or 5 and then increased to about 20. It is not clear that these were exogamic kinship groups. They were probably military societies, taking into their membership all the men of the tribe. The name Calpoli, or Great House, which was applied to them, seems to have referred to a sort of barracks or general meeting place in each ward or division of the city where arms and trophies were kept, and the youth educated in the art of war. The title in land was held by the Calpoli, and the right of use distributed among the heads of families who held possession only so long as the land was worked. Each Calpoli seems to have had a certain autonomy in governmental matters, as well as a local religious organization. It is curious to find in Salvador, far to the south, the word Calpoli applied to the platform mounds that surround courts in the ancient ruins. This use of the word may indicate that the great houses of the different societies were ordinarily the principal buildings of the city and that they were used for civil, military, and religious purposes. In forming judgment on the fundamentals of social organization among the Aztecs, we must remember that no clear case of kinship clans has been reported south of the area of the United States. Among the Cachiquels, a Mayan tribe of the Guatemalan highlands, 2 royal houses are reported from which the ruling chief was alternately drawn. The Tzotzils have been explained as a bat clan because their name is associated with the word for bat and because a bat god appears to have been their patron deity. The Mazatecas and Mixtecas, Deer People and Cloud People, also have clan-like names, but in all cases these are designations of entire tribes, not of subdivisions of tribes. Tenochtitlan was divided into 4 quarters, and each quarter subdivided into a number of wards. An under-chief was elected from each of the subdivisions, which are doubtless to be identified with the Calpoli, and an over-chief from each of the 4 quarters. Above these stood the ward chief of the entire tribe, who was likewise elected, but within the limits of a fixed aristocracy. A second great chief, who seems to have been a peace officer with some important relation to the priesthood, was nominally equal to the ward chief, but practically much less powerful. The real center of the home government was a council made up of all the chiefs. In time of war, the ward chief was in supreme command and could either delegate his rights or act in person. Just how much the priesthood intervened in governmental affairs cannot be definitely put in words, but their power was doubtless great. Certain lands were cultivated in common for the officers of church and state, and much of the tribute from conquered provinces was devoted to their needs. The Tecpan or temple enclosure. The ceremonial center of Tenochtitlan has been transformed into the civic center of Mexico City. The cathedral, the national palace, and the Zócalo or Plaza Mayor mark the site where once stood the famous Tecpan or temple enclosure. Within the serpent walls, according to Sahagún, there were 25 temple pyramids, 5 oratories, sundry fasting houses, 4 bowl-shaped stones, 1 disc-shaped stone, a great stepped altar, a star column, 7 skull racks, 2 bulkheads, 2 enclosed areas, a well, 3 bathing places, 2 cellar-like rooms, a dancing place, 9 priest houses, a prison for the gods of conquered nations, arsenals, workplaces, etc. A native plan of the Tecpan, much simplified, occurs in the Sahagún manuscript. The Great Pyramid arose in several terraces and was surmounted by two temples, each 3 stories in height, one dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and the other to Tlaloc. Each temple contained an image of the god to which it was dedicated and a sacrificial altar. The walls were encrusted with blood of human victims whose hearts, still beating, had been torn out for divine food and whose bodies had been rolled down the steep flight of temple stairs. The foundations for the Great Pyramids were laid in 1447 by Moctezuma I. The pyramids were completed in 1485 while Tizoc was war chief, and the final dedication ceremonies were held in 1487. Several very interesting large sculptures and many minor objects have been unearthed on the site of the Tecpan. In 1790 and 1791 were found 3 famous monoliths, the Calendar Stone, the Stone of Tizoc, sacrificial stone, and the statue of Coatlicue. Since 1897, many fine pieces of pottery and several sculptures have been excavated near the cathedral and placed in the Museo Nacional. The Calendar Stone. The great sculptured monument known as the Calendar Stone or Stone of the Sun is the most valuable object that has come down intact from the time of the Aztecs. It is a single piece of porphyry, irregular except for the sculpture face. It now weighs over 20 tons and is estimated that the original weight was over twice as much. The sculptured disc is about 12 feet in diameter. This great stone was transported by men over many miles of marshy lake bottom before it could be placed in position in front of the Temple of the Sun in the temple enclosure that has just been described. The stone was doubtless thrown down from its original position by the soldiers of Cortes and might have been lost to sight. We know, however, that it was exposed to view about 1560 and was then buried by order of the Archbishop of Mexico City, lest its presence should cause the Indians to revert to their original pagan beliefs. It was rediscovered in 1790 and was afterwards built into the facade of the cathedral, where it remained until 1885, when it was removed to the nearby museum. The calendar stone is not a symbol of the sun's face marked with the divisions of the year, but it is a record of the cosmogonic myth of the Aztecs and the creations and destructions of the world. In the center is the face of the sun god Tonatiuh, enclosed in the middle of the symbol called Olin. Tonatiuh is often represented by a much simpler sign of a circle with 4 or more subdivisions resembling those of a compass, which are intended to represent the rays of the sun. Olin is one of the day signs and means movement or perhaps earthquake. It has also been explained as a graphic representation of the apparent course of the sun during the year. The history of the world, according to the Aztecan myth, is divided into 5 suns or ages, 4 of which refer to the past and 1 to the present. The present sun is called Olin Tonatiuh because it is destined to be destroyed by an earthquake. The day signs of the 4 previous suns are represented in the rectangular projections of the central Olin symbol, beginning at the upper right-hand corner and proceeding to the left. They are 4 Ocelotl, jaguar, 4 Ijecatl, wind, 4 Cuautli, rain, 4 Atl, water, and they refer to destruction, first by jaguars, second by a hurricane, third by a volcanic rain of fire, fourth by a flood. It is claimed by some that the year 13 Acatl, reed, recorded at the top of the monument between the reptile tails, refers to the first year of the present sun. The 5th sun will end with the day 4 Olin that is expressed in the central symbol already described. For this reason, a fast was held in each recurrence of this day. Outside of the Olin symbol, but between its arms, are 4 hieroglyphs of uncertain meaning. Next to this area dealing with the great ages of the world comes a band of the 20-day signs of the Aztecan month. Outside of this band are several others which probably represent in a conventionalized manner the rays of the sun and the turquoise and eagle feathers with which the sun disk was believed to be decorated. Finally, outside of all are 2 plumed monsters meeting face to face at the bottom of the disk. In each reptile face is seen a human face in profile. These reptiles are probably to be identified as the Xiuhcoatl or fire serpents. The newly discovered national stone pictures the calendar stone in vertical position on a mound and at the head of a flight of steps. The dates on the side of the stairway are 1 Touchley and 2 Acatl, 1506 and 1507, indicating that the calendar stone was dedicated in connection with the new fire ceremony. The design on the back of this newfound monument pictures the eagle on the cactus, symbolic of the founding of Tenochtitlan. Other sculptures adorn the sides, the top, and the bottom of the stone. Stone of Tizoc. The sacrificial stone, or stone of Tizoc, is believed to have been carved by order of Tizoc, the war chief who ruled from 1482 to 1486, as a memorial offering to Mexican arms on the completion of the great temple to the Mexican god of war. The stone was a Huaxicalli, or eagle bowl. The name was given to large bowls which were used to hold the blood and the heart of human victims sacrificed to the gods. The same name was extended to the large drum-shaped stone under consideration, which has a pit in the center and a sort of canal running from the center to one side, which might have been intended to drain off the blood. Human sacrifice actually took place on this stone, but it is pretty certain that it was not one of the Temalacatl, or gladiator stones, on which were staged mortal combats as ceremonies. According to description, the gladiator stones were pierced by a hole in the center, so that one or more captives could be bound fast by a rope. On the top of the stone of Tizoc is a representation of Tonatiuh, or the sun's disk, much less complex than that which we have seen on the calendar stone, but with many similar parts. On the sides of the stone are 15 groups of figures, each group representing a conqueror and his captive. The victorious soldier appears each time in the guise of the war god Huitzilopochtli or his wizard brother Tezcatlipoca. The left foot of the figure ends in two scroll-like objects that might represent the hummingbird feathers that form the left foot of Huitzilopochtli. But Tezcatlipoca also had a deformed foot. Moreover, on the side of the headdress is a disc with a flame-shaped object coming out of it. This may represent the smoking mirror of Tezcatlipoca. The captive wears costumes that change slightly from one figure to the next. Over the head of the captive in each instance is the hieroglyph of a captured town or district. Nearly all the place name hieroglyphs have been deciphered. The list is interesting historically because it gives the principal conquests up to the reign of Tizoc. Starting at the side directly across the stone from the groove or drain, we see that the figure of the victor has behind his head a hieroglyph that represents a leg. This is the hieroglyph of Tizoc, and the victim in this case represents the district of Matlatzinco in the valley of Toluca. This district was brought under subjection by Tizoc himself. Among the other conquered cities are such well-known ones as Chalco, Xochimilco, and Colhuacan in the vicinity of Lake Texcoco, and Ahuilizapan, Orizaba, and Tuxpan that are more distant. Coatlicue. The famous statue of the earth goddess Coatlicue, the goddess with the serpent skirt, is one of the most striking examples of barbaric imagination. The name Teoyamiki is often given to this uncouth figure, but the identification is faulty. Like the other great sculptures we have just examined, it doubtless occupied an important place in the great ceremonial center of Tenochtitlan, but no ancient reference to it is extant. This goddess is reported to have been the mother of the gods. The statue may be described as follows. The feet are furnished with claws. The skirt is a writhing mass of braided rattlesnakes. The arms are doubled up, and the hands are snake heads on a level with the shoulders. Around the neck and hanging down over the breast is a necklace of alternating hands and hearts with a death's head pendant. The head of this monstrous woman is the same on front and back, and is formed of two serpent heads that meet face to face. The forked tongue and the four downward pointing fangs belong half and half to each of the two profile faces. Mexican writing. The means of record employed in Mexican codices are in part pictographic and in part hieroglyphic. The sequence of the historical events in these native manuscripts is often indicated by a line of footprints leading from one place or scene of action to another. Historical records of this type resemble old-fashioned maps, and some are actually called maps. The names of towns in these documents are represented by true hieroglyphs, and often the character of the country is indicated by pictures of typical vegetation, such as maguey plants for the highlands and palms for the lowlands. The day of the year in which took place the foundation of the town or whatever event is intended to be recorded is usually placed in conjunction with the hieroglyph or picture. Conquest is indicated by a place name hieroglyph with a spear thrust into it or by a temple on fire, while warfare is a shield and bundle of lances encircled by footprints. A few examples of Nahuatl hieroglyphs will now be given to illustrate this interesting method of writing. It must be remembered that there is nothing in the nature of a connected narrative. The hieroglyphs or word pictures are limited to geographical and personal names, including the names of gods, to months, days, numbers, objects of commerce, and a few objects or ideas of ceremonial import. Some of the signs are in no degree realistic and have a definite meaning by common consent alone, such as the symbol for gold, figure 73. Others are abbreviated and conventionalized pictures of objects. Thus, the head of a god or of an animal frequently appears as the sign of the whole. But the most important and interesting word signs are rebuses in which separate syllables or groups of syllables are represented by more or less conventionalized pictures. The whole word picture is a combination of syllable pictures which indicate phonetically the word as a whole. Very often advantage is taken of puns on whole or partial words, while color and position are also employed to indicate sounds and syllables. In figure 74 are given a few of the more common syllable pictures. The name of the object represented is cut down by the elimination of TL, LI, etc. that form the nominal endings. Thus the picture of water, atl, becomes the sign for the sound a. That of stone tetl is cut down to the syllable te. Several of these syllable pictures are combined to represent a whole word. The hieroglyphs of the 20 days of the month, see figure 76, are frequently represented, but those of the 18 months are not nearly so well known. As for the gods, the faces are usually pictured, especially when these are grotesque, but sometimes details of dress or an object connected with a special ceremony is sufficient to recall the divinity. The Mexican system of numbers was based on 20s. The units were figured by dots, the 20s by flags, the 400s by a device like a tree that represented the air, and the 8000s by the ceremonial pouches in which copal incense was carried. End of section 9.